The world outside is silent, not peaceful, just unaware. The sky is still dim, the streets still cold, and Fort Dix remains wrapped in its usual pre-dawn stillness. Nothing feels unusual to anyone outside the prison gates, but inside these walls, a storm has already begun. Before any news reporter checks their phone, before federal clerks even pour their first cup of coffee, before Diddy realizes what he has walked into, a new video has surfaced, a new violation has been confirmed, and a new sentence has already begun to form in the shadows of the federal system. Before we go deeper, what do you think this new prison video reveals? Was Diddy acting out of desperation, or does this show something darker happening behind those prison walls? Tell me your thoughts below, and if you're new here, subscribe to The Hidden Evidence. What's coming next is intense. Let's get into it. It didn't start with shouting, or alarms, or chaos spiraling down the cell blocks. It started with something far quieter, a flicker of movement captured in a late-night feed. A movement that one officer almost ignored, almost dismissed, almost scrolled past. Inside the Fort Dix surveillance room, an overnight officer sat hunched forward, fighting the familiar exhaustion that clings to the 2 a.m. shift. 6 monitors glowed in front of him, each displaying hallways, corners, doorways all silent. Then something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to snap his attention into focus. A shape moved where no movement was scheduled. A shadow shifted where no shadow belonged. A figure stepped into a blind spot zone the prison cameras are designed to monitor carefully. His chair creaked as he leaned forward. He replayed the footage, paused, rewound, zoomed in. This wasn't random. This wasn't pacing. This wasn't an inmate restless from the cold. This was deliberate. He swallowed hard, pulled the clip into the isolated review window, and watched it again, this time without blinking. Someone was breaking protocol. Not subtly, not accidentally, blatantly, and not just any inmate. The silhouette on the screen was unmistakable. Another officer walked in, coffee in hand, ready to joke about the quiet night until he saw the expression frozen on the first officer's face. "What's wrong?" The first officer didn't answer. He just tapped the screen. The second officer's eyes narrowed as he watched the footage unfold. Seconds passed. Then his jaw clenched. He understood. This wasn't a disciplinary slip. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a moment of stress. This was a federal breach, caught on clear camera, with full awareness of the consequences. The 10th second of footage confirmed everything. By the time a third officer entered the room, the silence alone told him something serious had happened. They didn't argue. They didn't discuss possibilities. They didn't search for excuses. They isolated the clip, secured it, pulled the log reports, tagged it under emergency protocol, and then someone leaked it. No one knows how, no one knows who. But within minutes, a blurry, compressed version of the footage slipped out into the digital world like a match falling into dry brush. First on a small account, then reposted, then slowed down, then zoomed in. Comments exploded instantly. "Is that him? He's done. No way he's surviving another violation. That's definitely a federal hit." The internet didn't know the full context, but they knew enough. While the video spread like wildfire through social media, the real explosion happened somewhere else. SDNY. Inside a dim federal office, a tired clerk noticed an urgent red-flagged alert in the evidence queue. He forwarded it. Minutes later, Judge Arun Subramanian was staring at a screen illuminated by the playback of the new footage. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He watched with the cold discipline of a man who has seen enough cases to know exactly what this kind of violation means. He replayed it, then replayed it again, then one more time, slow, methodical, precise. There was no misunderstanding, no room for argument, no technical glitch. This was an intentional breach from an inmate who had already been under strict federal supervision. An intent like this demands consequence. Back at Fort Dix, the warden was already making his way to the control room. He stepped inside without speaking, walked directly to the monitor, and watched the footage. 10 seconds was all it took. His shoulders dropped slightly, not from surprise, but from recognition. This was no longer a prison matter. This now belonged to the federal court. "Start the file," he said. 2 words. Quiet, final. Logs began printing, reports compiled, screenshots captured, every detail pulled and added to the growing file that would accompany the footage. Meanwhile, Diddy slept in his cell unaware that a single piece of video had already detonated his entire legal landscape. He didn't know the clip had gone viral. He didn't know the judge had seen it. He didn't know the warden had already escalated it. He didn't know federal marshals were being mobilized. But the sound traveling down the hallways was shifting, a subtle change in footsteps, a different cadence on the radios, an unmistakable tension gripping the air. Inside SDNY, Judge Subramanian typed the first line of a new order: Emergency Transport Classification, High Risk. And that line was the first step toward a sentence Diddy never thought he'd face. A sentence harsher than anything that came before. A sentence triggered by 10 seconds of video. A sentence now moving toward him with the momentum of a collapsing world. Because this time, the viral footage didn't just break protocol, it forced the system to tighten around him fast, cold, and irreversible. The moment the emergency transport order hit the internal radios, Fort Dix shifted from controlled tension to something far sharper. It wasn't panic. It wasn't chaos. It was precision, the kind that only appears when a facility realizes something has crossed the point of no return. Officers who were leaning casually against railings straightened up. Supervisors who were reviewing paperwork snapped their heads up. Even the inmates who had been half asleep felt the air change. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. It was the silence that follows the sound of a decision already made. Inside the secure evidence wing, a specialized review team stood shoulder to shoulder around the looping footage. These weren't regular guards. These weren't rookies. These were the officers trained to examine incidents that threaten the structure of federal operations. The video played again, and again, and again. Each replay offered no relief, no new detail, no alternate interpretation, only confirmation. The zoomed shot showed the same deliberate glance over the shoulder, the same calculated shift in weight, the same act executed with precise timing as the hallway camera rotated. If there was any doubt earlier, it was gone. This wasn't instinct, one officer muttered under his breath. It was planned. The senior-most officer paused the clip at the exact moment that sealed everything. A frozen frame, sharp, undeniable. He exhaled slowly, the air leaving his lungs with the heaviness of inevitability. "We're done here," he said. "This goes straight to SDNY." A few minutes later, the warden returned, not walking fast, not walking slow, but with the steady weight of a man who knew the next hours would shape national headlines. He didn't speak at first. He just stared at the paused frame on the monitor. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Then the nod came, subtle, heavy, resigned. "Prepare the documentation." Those 3 words carried the entire atmosphere of a decision that could not be reversed. Officers began assembling the file. Surveillance logs, previous disciplinary notes, staff observations, timestamp verification, technical authentication, psychological monitoring records, movement logs, hallway schedules, camera rotation data. Every page added another layer to the case. Every detail became another nail in the legal coffin forming around Diddy. The file grew thicker, the room grew quieter, and then tap, tap, tap. The heavy boots of U.S. Marshals echoed down the corridor. The extraction team had arrived. Their presence alone shifted the gravity of the entire facility. Officers instinctively stepped aside, offering an unobstructed path. These marshals weren't here for standard transport. They only appeared when the situation had escalated to the highest operational level. This wasn't a transfer. This was a removal, a federal retrieval. Inside his cell, Diddy sat rigid, staring at the faint reflection of the light on the metal sink. He still didn't know why the corridors felt different. He still didn't understand why the guards' voices carried a tone he hadn't heard before. But he felt something tightening around him, a pressure, a pull, a silent countdown. The footsteps approached slow, deliberate, unified. Not the scattered rhythm of a night shift officer doing rounds, not the casual pace of a guard checking doors. This was coordinated movement, the kind of movement that means, this is it. 3 officers stopped outside his cell. 2 marshals stood behind them, posture unbroken, expressions carved from stone. The lead officer inserted the key. A mechanical click echoed through the block. "Stand up," he said. No anger, no rushing, just finality. Diddy rose slowly, like each movement required permission from the weight pressing on his chest. His wrists were brought forward. Click. The cuffs locked shut. His ankles were secured next. Click. A chain connected the restraints. As the marshal stepped in, the officer who first reviewed the footage murmured, "Not for the record, not for the logs." But because he had to say it out loud. A line was crossed tonight. Diddy didn't respond. He couldn't. The words echoed in his mind like a verdict he already understood. The escort began. Step after step, the sound of metal scraping the floor signaled his movement through the cell block. Inmates gripped their bars, their eyes following silently. No one laughed. No one cheered. No one whispered. This wasn't drama. This wasn't gossip. This was a moment every inmate recognized when the system stops correcting and starts condemning. Steel doors hissed open, closed behind him, opened again, closed again. Each one sounded heavier than the last. At the end of the corridor, the transport tunnel waited dim, cold, the air buzzing faintly with electricity from the security systems overhead. The black reinforced van stood at the far end. Not a standard transfer vehicle, not a courtroom shuttle. This one was fortified, armored, escorted. 3 marshals flanked it. Another 2 formed a perimeter. Diddy didn't say a word as the marshals guided him inside. His feet touched the metal floor. The shackles vibrated against it. His restraints were locked into anchor points. The doors closed. A deep, echoing thud like the ceiling of something that would never reopen. A moment of stillness. Then the engine roared to life. The convoy moved, slow at first, through one gate, then another, then a third. The final barrier opened. The van crossed the threshold. And just like that, Fort Dix was behind him. This wasn't a normal transport. It was too quiet, too guarded, too final. Inside the van, Diddy lifted his head just enough to see the faint reflection in the darkened window. He barely recognized the man staring back. He looked older, smaller, colder, a shadow of the man who once dominated stages and headlines. But the escort wasn't slowing. It wasn't hesitating. It wasn't giving him time to process anything. Federal extraction moves like an avalanche, silent for a long time, then suddenly unstoppable. Ahead of him, the skyline began to form in the distance. Gray towers rising from the horizon. A city waking up. A courtroom preparing. Diddy wasn't being transported to an appearance. He was being delivered into a verdict already assembling itself, and each passing second brought him closer to the seat where everything would collapse. Because once the footage reached SDNY, the judge didn't delay. He didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for the morning docket. He was preparing to speak. And the sentence Diddy was about to hear would redefine the rest of his life. The convoy descended into Manhattan like something pulled by gravity, itself silent, controlled, inevitable. No sirens, no flashing lights, no spectacle. The air outside was still gray, still cold, still waking up. Delivery trucks rattled down empty streets, street lamps hummed, and the first morning joggers trotted past without realizing the most consequential inmate transfer of the year was passing beneath their feet. But deep below ground, inside the belly of the SDNY complex, the atmosphere was already electric. The reinforced gates opened, the rumbling engine quieted, and the transport van rolled into the underground docking bay with a final vibrating halt. 2 marshals stepped down first, scanning the perimeter with movements so synchronized they looked rehearsed. Then the rear doors swung open, releasing a wave of cold, sterile air from inside the van. "Bring him out." Diddy stepped down slowly, the shackles around his ankles clinking against the metal lip of the doorway. His head was angled downward, not by force, but by the heaviness pressing against him. The weight of consequence. The weight of whatever sentence waited above him. The weight of knowing the system was moving faster than he could process. His feet met the concrete, hard, cold, unforgiving. The marshals closed in around him immediately, forming a moving wall of federal authority. No gaps, no vulnerabilities. Their formation wasn't about intimidation. It was protocol for an inmate classified as critical risk. They guided him forward. The underground corridor stretched ahead like a tunnel carved into stone-thick concrete walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, reinforced steel doors. Every step echoed sharply, bouncing upward as if announcing his arrival to the floors above. He didn't resist, didn't ask questions, didn't even look toward the officers on either side of him. He simply moved. With each step, the sound of the chains grew louder in his own ears. Not because the volume had changed, but because the finality was beginning to settle in. Every clink felt like the punctuation on a sentence he hadn't fully read yet. They reached the elevator. A marshal swiped a key card. A green light flashed. The doors opened with a quiet chime that felt painfully out of place. The marshals guided him inside. The doors closed. The ascent began. The elevator hummed around him, rising floor by floor. Diddy looked up just enough to see his reflection in the brushed steel panel, a distorted version of himself, blurred by the metal's dull finish. A man who once lived in penthouses, stood backstage at award shows, commanded crowds was now standing in a steel box, shackled, silent, delivered upward into judgment. The doors slid open again. This floor was brighter, colder, more controlled. Marshals lined the hallway shoulder to shoulder. Not one spoke. Not one shifted their stance. They stared straight ahead, forming a corridor of bodies that Diddy would have to walk through. He took one step, then another, and the sound of his chains clinked through the silence like a ritual. It didn't feel like he was walking toward a courtroom. It felt like he was walking into the final chapter of something he couldn't rewrite. At the end of the hallway, two massive wooden doors stood closed. Their edges glowed faintly from the lights inside. Beyond them, something pulsed in the air movement. Tension, silence, waiting to be broken. A marshal stepped forward, placed his hand on the door, and pushed. The room was a vacuum of sound. No public audience, no cameras, no buzzing chatter, no footsteps except those of the marshals guiding him inside. Only essential personnel were present: federal prosecutors, senior marshals, court clerks, legal analysts, and Judge Arun Subramanian seated at the bench, posture straight, expression carved in calm stone. Diddy faltered, just slightly, just enough that one of the marshals tightened a grip on his arm to steady him. He moved forward, guided by hands that were steady but not cruel. The officers lowered him into the defense seat, and the chains rattled once as he settled. Judge Subramanian didn't speak immediately. He waited, not for drama, not for effect, but because silence itself was now the opening statement. He studied Diddy not as a celebrity, not as a mogul, not as a public figure, but as a federal inmate on the brink of a ruling no one comes back from. When the judge finally leaned forward, his voice was steady enough to cut through the room like a deliberate blade. "Mr. Combs," he began. Diddy raised his eyes slowly. "You were provided structure. You were provided boundaries. You were given opportunities to correct your behavior. After your previous violation, you were told explicitly that any further breach, any violation of federal protocol would be escalated directly to this court." His tone didn't rise. It didn't soften. It remained brutally even. "And yet," the judge continued, "you have committed another violation, this time captured clearly, indisputably on video, this time showing not confusion, but intent." A prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the new footage shows a direct, deliberate break in protocol. The behavior is not impulsive. It's not reactionary. It is controlled and executed with full awareness of what he was doing." The judge nodded once, acknowledging the statement without breaking eye contact with Diddy. "What concerns this court," he said, voice dropping slightly, "is the mindset behind your actions." He tapped a still frame clipped to the front of the evidence file, a frozen image of Diddy mid-violation, eyes focused, expression unreadable. "You acted without hesitation, without caution, without any regard for consequence. That type of decision-making is a threat to institutional safety." The judge closed the file slowly. Every person in the room felt the weight of that movement. "This court," he continued, "cannot rehabilitate an inmate who refuses the very concept of rehabilitation. We cannot correct behavior that does not respond to correction." He took a breath. "Mr. Combs, please stand." The marshals moved closer, bracing him as he rose. The chains tightened. The room fell silent. Judge Subramanian delivered the words with surgical finality. Due to your repeated violations of federal correctional protocol, due to the evidence contained in the new video recording, due to the escalation of intent demonstrated in your actions, due to your failure to respond to prior disciplinary measures, and due to your demonstrated risk to institutional order. He paused, a pause heavy enough to end a life. This court imposes an enhanced sentence of life imprisonment with restrictions applied under maximum security classification. A low ripple of quiet shock swept across the courtroom, not from gasps or whispers, but from the collective intake of breath. But the judge wasn't done. He leaned forward. You will not be eligible for sentence reduction. Diddy's head lowered. You will not be eligible for parole. His breath faltered. You will be transferred to a maximum security federal facility immediately following this ruling. The file closed. Soft, final, absolute. Diddy blinked rapidly, his eyes shimmering not with tears of protest, but with the crushing realization of what had just happened. His shoulders sagged inward. His posture collapsed. His grip on reality seemed to loosen, even as the marshals tightened their grip on him. This wasn't a sentence. It was an ending. The marshals guided him a step backward. He didn't resist, didn't speak, didn't attempt to look around the room one last time. He simply moved as though the world had gone silent. The courtroom doors opened. Chains dragged across the floor behind him, each metallic clink echoing like a farewell to whatever life he once had. The marshals escorted him out of the chamber, down the hallway, and toward the elevator that would take him back underground and then miles away from the world he used to command. When the doors closed behind him, the silence left inside the courtroom felt like the lingering aftershock of a seismic event. And that was it. A mogul, a powerhouse, a titan of an industry reduced to a man being escorted into a future made entirely of steel, rules, and walls. If this collapse shook you, if you want the deeper layers, the hidden evidence, and the revelations coming next, subscribe to the hidden evidence. Hit like, drop your theories in the comments, and turn on notifications. Because what's coming next in this case, it changes everything.